and we have a member of the press here, by the way. I'll start with the first. Oh, well, the first thing we have to do is to ask if there are any members of the public who have any. Oh no, that comes next, doesn't it? Sorry, Emily. Election of vice chairman for 2023-24. Do we have any nominations? No. Well, we don't. We can carry on without one. It's only if we need a chairman to stand in because the chairman, that at the moment is me, is unable to attend, but we can see how that goes. I'll move on to public questions. Are there any members of the public who have any questions? There are not. Are there any apologies for absence? Item 3.
Yes, we've got apologies from Councillor Carrington, Angie Tomlin, Sharon Hayes and Sheila Brooks.
Thank you. And the next item is the minutes of the meeting of the 7th of June 2023. And first of all, we need to approve them. And are there first of all any amendments anyone has to make to those minutes? There are not. So can we have a motion to move them? I'll move them from the chair. All those in favour of approving the minutes of the previous meeting? Okay, well.
Both are indicated online.
Yeah, so that's passed. Are there any questions arising from the previous minutes? There are not? No. The next item is an introduction from Andrew Fletcher, who we briefly met last week as the then future Public Rights of Way and Access Manager. He is now in post. Before I invite Andrew to speak, I'm going to mention that we have tabled for item 12, which we probably won't take that too long to get to, is the future work of the Local Access Forum. And I think it's timely to say that because it's pretty clear that things are not going well with the forum, considering the low turnout, that nobody wants to be the chairman, etc. And that is why we want to have a discussion and start a process, perhaps with the two authorities who appoint us, as to where the forum is going to go and what can be done with it. But I'll invite Andrew. Do you have a prepared little address for us? Or not, an unprepared one will do.
I think you, thank you, Chairman. We'll have to settle for an unprepared one, but I can do that. So my name's Andrew Fletcher. I'm the new Public Rights Way and Access Manager, working under Chris Miller, who's now the Head of Environment. So I'm relatively new from Lincolnshire. I've moved up early this year from Berkshire. So it's been a sharp learning curve in all of the names and particularly the scale of the county, but I'm very happy to be here. As some members will remember that I tuned into the last Local Access Forum meeting to give throw in some ideas about how the LAF can boost its profile. But I'm here in post and generally eager to carry on. As a sort of background of where I'm from, I've worked in Public Rights of Way since about 2002. Before that, I worked in the IT sector for Hewlett-Packard, and before that, I graduated from my law degree. I also hold a postgraduate diploma in Public Rights of Way and Access Management, amongst other things. So I've been fairly experienced in rights of way, and working for a unitary authority has given me a good overview of everything. So I've dealt with not only the definitive map and the legal side of things, but I've also dealt with maintenance and enforcement and improvement and dealing with large projects such as cycleway schemes and things like that. So that is effectively my CV, but I'm here and eager to carry on. And as I say, I've got more things to say under some of the other items which you've already mentioned.
I'll see if anybody wants to ask Andrew any questions first, but Chris Miller's name was mentioned, and not everybody in the room might know that Chris Miller was the previous holder of the post that Andrew now has, and Chris Miller is now basically your manager. You're one up from you now. Yes, he's gone.
Absolutely.
Up. Yeah. So does anybody want to ask Andrew any questions at the moment there will, I'm sure, be opportunities later on when we're discussing the future of the forum. No? Nobody online? No. So we'll move on to item 7, which is Friends of Group, to receive a report by John Law, which invites the forum to consider setting up a Friends of Group. John, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, we were fortunate for Chris Miller actually sending us this information, and I think the Friends of Group is an excellent way to go in terms of helping us to raise funds and do things on the rights of way that possibly Lincolnshire County Council cannot do, because they can only do statutory duties. The only thing is the disability subgroup, we are stretched and we can't actually do anything extra ourselves. What I was going to say was if we could have 10 minutes discussion on this and then come back to it at the next forum meeting. But I think because there's so few of us, we leave it until the next forum meeting, and hopefully people will have had a chance to have a look at this and see whether anyone wants to be treasurer, for instance, or chair of the Friends of Group, and what activities they would like to include in that, whatever the Friends do, besides the disability access.
John, sorry, Chairman,
John Thorns.
I was going to ask a question if I could. Are we suggesting just one group or a number of groups? Because Lincolnshire is a very big county.
You can have as many groups as you wish, but you've got to have the people that are willing to join those groups, and it depends what sort of groups you want to set up. As far as the disability subgroup goes, it is a big county, and that's one of the reasons why we're so stretched. But we need some other way of accessing funds, and the money doesn't come easy to us. And likewise, if you want to do anything in terms of improving the rights of way that doesn't come under the remit of the county council, you've got to get funds from somewhere, and you'll only do it more easily, if you have a Friends of Group that sets up a treasurer and secretary and has a bank account.
Thank you, John. Any other questions? I'll move on to item 8, construction sites in the countryside, to receive a report by John Law.
Yeah, again, as there's so few of us here,
Yeah.
it isn't really that relevant. So if it's okay with the rest of the forum, or the forum members that are present, I'll continue to work on this, and I'll send round questionnaires for you forum members to respond to, so that we can build up a picture of what we want to do, and also talk to Rutland Local Access Forum, so we can build up a picture together. Can we either vote this through as yes, I continue, or no, I don't? I will be continuing with Rutland anyway, but...
Unless anybody wishes to propose the motion on those terms, I feel that it would be rather an empty gesture on our part at the moment, at this meeting, the way things are at the moment.
Okay.
Does that seem reasonable to you, John?
As I say, I'll be working with Rutland on it anyway, so
Yeah.
it's not an issue.
John Thorne again.
Well,
So-
I was just going to ask. I've read the paper, and I'm trying to work out what our stance is on it. I know we're not looking, but are we against these developments? I'm just a little bit lost exactly what point of view we're coming from, and it will be useful just to understand that a little bit more.
Yes, I'll certainly put that, if it's okay with the chair.
Yes.
I'll put some more details on it for circulation by Emily, and then you can come back to me and say whatever you feel is right. But what I want to do is build on it. I think it's good in terms of what's happening in terms of the cities and urban areas, but as I've said, in terms of the countryside, we need to be a bit more, have a bit more, besides the diversity net gain issue, we need to do something more than that.
For me, John, it's timely that this is here, not so much because we can deal with it straight away, but it's all rather grist to the mill for item 12, which is how we deal with everything and how we organise and approach our entire existence, really. So that was item 8, wasn't it? And you're now going to item 9. And this is the one where you mentioned the Grantham Canal, isn't it?
Item 9 is the permissive access,
Yeah.
and it was one I was going to say, which I've not had time to do anything further. If anyone else wants to take up that role, I'm quite happy for them to do it.
Well, I just want to pick up one thing from your report then and put it to Andrew. Andrew, have you read it, and the item about the Grantham Canal?
Item 9 is the Rutland
Sorry.
County Council
Sorry, we're on
permissive paths.
We're on the... Hang on.
Permissive access, item 9.
Oh, sorry. Which is agenda item... Oh, Countryside for All. It comes next. Sorry, I've got ahead of ourselves. Yes, sorry. This is...
Permissive access.
Yes. Go on, John.
Yes, so if you remember a couple of last meetings back, actually gave you a paper in terms of what the Rutland County Council, the Rutland Local Access Forum sent to Lord Benyon. And what I said I would do, because you wanted me to do as a forum, was to actually put something together for the Lincolnshire Local Access Forum to also be sent to Lord Benyon, and I think there were some MPs as well, but I've not done that. If anyone wants to take that up, or if you want to have a look at that, whether we should be doing it at a later stage, that's fine by me. Just to say, or to own up, I've done nothing about it.
No. Does anyone have anything to add to that, to say about it? I don't know what we can do at the moment to take anything forward, actually.
Okay.
I'm moving on then to item 9.
Item 10, I think.
Sorry, I meant item 10. Sorry, I'm getting... have I got this right? Countryside for All, yes. John,
So,
do you want to add anything to... Well, just make some... we have a written report, but...
you have a written report, yes, and it's fairly detailed anyway. Just going to go through 2 or 3 things. One was we were looking at funding it to also look at the National Lottery for funding, and it was up to 10,000 we could have if we were successful. They're changing it from the 15th of November to up to 20,000 for 2 years, but they've actually put a limit on it now, saying local authorities can apply for it, but it's unlikely if you have an income of over 250,000 that you're going to get any money for it. So I think going to the National Lottery for the Awards for All is not on. So we've just got to look in other places. And as I say, we've got the Just Giving funding page that we're creating now, and hopefully that'll be in circulation to the forum in the next few weeks. So you can look at that, and that's how we're going to hopefully attract some funding, and also through continuing to talk to local businesses. In terms of South Thoresby, well, Hearts Home Country Park, quite disappointed that we've all the local authorities across England have been given the opportunity to bid for funding for changing places toilets. And it's quite disappointing to see a number of those, not only in Lincolnshire, but other counties that haven't applied for funding, and you can see it's obviously needed. One of one of our countryside hall walks was Heart's Home Country Park, and it has actually had some one or two changes on it, and we're going to resurvey it. But it would have been an ideal place for a changing places toilet, as far as we're concerned, to attract more people to that particular place, more people that have limited mobility. And unfortunately, no funding has been applied for that particular park. South Thoresby Warren, again, I think I mentioned we've mentioned it in previous reports. We did have a countryside hall leaflet for that, but because the standard of the paths had dropped, we had to pull that from the portfolio of walks. We've been looking at how we can get funding so that we can improve that country park. This is one that's owned by Lincolnshire County Council. And, South Thoresby Warren is owned by Lincolnshire County Council. And we've looked at how we can get funding to improve the walks, but also when speaking to other members of the council, because we try and involve as many people as possible, one of the things they wanted was a changing places toilet, and certainly we would like that close to that area, but unfortunately Lincolnshire County Council hasn't applied for any funding, or didn't apply for any funding. All the funding applications from the government at the moment are closed anyway, but it would have been nice if people want it there to see it actually move there. RIMAC, as I've said, it is on hold at the moment, but as soon as it's available, or the work's done on that, we'll continue to do a survey on that and get a leaflet out for that. The Grantham Canal, I think Emily's got a few photos for you. Andrew's kindly spoke to me before the meeting and said in terms of the Grantham Canal, we can actually push that to the Properties Department. Is that right, Andrew?
Yes, it's certainly something we can look into. The point I was making is that whilst the Rights of Way and Access team are limited funds are directed to only those paths that are on the definitive map, if the council is owning it and in its capacity as landowner, it would be our property team that would have the portfolio. So it's not necessarily a requirement for it to go on the definitive map in order for physical works and improvements to be undertaken on the ground. So it's I need to find out the correct portfolio holder for that particular parcel of land, but there is possibilities. One of the things that I will counsel the laugh about is it is still a case of finding the money, but there is some discussions that I can have, and I can also report back that the forum, as a strategic advisory body, should the forum wish me to do so, is advising the council of the need to maintain areas that are open to the public. It would need to be in its strategic context, of course, but that's one of the.
Can, Andrew, perhaps you're the one to clarify this, exactly what has happened? Do I gather that this was merely a request to put it on the definitive map? Or has anything been done in terms of formal process of the definitive map?
And looking at the very helpful history that's in the report, it appears that it was going forward as a deed of dedication, which would mean the council would be dedicating the rights of way over it. But due to staff changes and staff member leaving, this is where it's just fallen by the wayside. So it needs to be picked up.
So
and
it's
run with
not a
it.
question of there being an existing right-of-way that needs recording. It's a question of creating a new one, and then it would automatically go on the definitive map. So the
Yes,
definitive
that's
map
correct.
seems a bit of a red herring here. It's not really the point.
It is in that sense, because we can dedicate the rights and it will go on the map, but that doesn't necessarily transfer the maintenance responsibility to the council as the highway authority. The
Well-
best option I would advise on this is to look at this from a property perspective
Yeah.
first, and then there's an element of choice as to, is it worth going through the dedication process to add it to the map? Is the path at risk? There's a number of factors that we can take into account, but getting it on the map doesn't. What we really want to do is get things on the ground changed.
Yes, and that raises the question, so far as the county council's own land is concerned, how does it deal with permissive access? Because there must be, or what if there hasn't been already, circumstances where it owns land to which the public has access, but which is not public. I mean, it's not public by right. I mean, it's not a public right of way. I mean, I can't think offhand of some, but there must be some.
There certainly is. In most of the country parks, for example, a lot of the access will be permitted rather than by
Yeah.
right. It is something that I'm happy to take forward with our property team. And as I say, if we couch it in a advice from the LAF that we need to develop or look at our policies regarding permitted access on council-owned land, that would fit within the realm that we're dealing with.
Yes. So this land is not land to which the public are given any permissive access at the moment.
Having said that, it's on our Countryside for All leaflet. So in effect, and we've got Lincolnshire County Council on the front of that, sort of owning the leaflet with us. So we are giving them.
Well, I
access.
mean, fairly clearly, if the county council has land which it is, as it were, throwing open to the public, but not as of right, but as of permissively, it needs to have, if it does not have, some sort of clear instructions to its staff as to how they inspect and maintain that land to make sure that it's safe and convenient for the public to use it. As you would expect, as you say, managing a public park, you make sure the paths are in good condition and that any gates and so on hang on the hinges and all that kind of thing. There needs to be a system for doing it. If there is a system, then they need to draw into our attention to the fact that they're neglecting their duty in respect of this, and if there isn't, they need to get one. So, can we? Can you take that forward then as advice from if we?
Absolutely. If I
Yeah.
could ask Emily to mark that down as an action to take forward, as well as this as a specific example of a wider strategic question.
Yeah. Yes, go on.
Sorry, I've still got some more. So across the Lincolnshire borders, we're also looking at, we've got our own people in Lincolnshire wanting to see similar leaflets for across the border, and likewise people from across the border of the county wanting to come to have routes in their particular county. So we also thought it was a good idea to help us gain funding, to say that we would also look at routes across our county borders. In terms of that, we've already established contact with Rutland, and they're happy with that. North East Links obviously is part of our local access forum anyway, and I'd like to thank Councillor Cairns for his contribution here with a number of areas that he thought were appropriate. As I say, the Leicestershire Local Access Forum, they're quite happy and welcoming us, and so is Nottinghamshire. In terms of changing places toilets, the ones we've not currently looked at, we were very pleased to see Boston, City of Lincoln, East Lindsey, South Holland and South Stephen and North East Lincolnshire local authorities being allocated funding, and they are either creating those changing places toilets or some of them have been created. Bear in mind, this is something that when we initially had the disability subgroup, we pulled together a number of disabled groups or people that represented disability groups to talk to them, ask them what they wanted to help them get out into the countryside and appreciate the countryside. One of the top things on their list was disabled toilets and changing places toilets. In the early days, there were hardly any of those around. As I say, now the government has at long last recognised the need for this, and it's disappointing to see some councils not actually asking for funding. The total funding I can't remember offhand, but you'll see it online, and it was they actually gave out more than that amount of funding. So North Stephen, one thing that I'm really, really disappointed in, and so is the rest of the disability for subgroup, is the Wispy Nature Reserve. Probably, if you exclude the castle and the cathedral, probably one of the most visited inland places in Lincolnshire in terms of day visitors, and we can't have a change in places toilet there. I am still looking at other ways of doing it. Obviously, North Stephen feels that they can't do it, but there are other things that we can look at. City of Lincoln, again, this is relating to Hearts Home Country Park, and Lincolnshire County Council, we're really talking about in relation to Virginia House and other day centres that are owned by the County Council, because Virginia House people, or people that attend Virginia House, also use South Thoresby Warren. Virginia House, I believe, is in Louth, so it's fairly close to them. Miles Without Barriers, that project's being undertaken by Rutland Countryside Access Forum and Rutland County Council. The aim of the project is to have an interactive website for the public to use, displaying standards of accessibility on each of the pros in the county. And as I say, the progress and outcome of the project will be monitored by myself, because I'll be involved in it anyway. And I'll report back on that so that we could have a look and see if it's something that we would like to do as a forum and as a county council in Lincolnshire. One of the things that was mentioned in the previous 2 forum meetings ago was South Holland and their lack of countryside for all routes in that district. I attend one of their meetings, and it is in actual fact the South Holland Community Group that have actually pointed us in the right way of getting some funding for the Countryside for All leaflets. So it's a great shame that we can't see anything that is suitable in that area, but we're still asking for people to come up with ideas. But if we do have a Miles Without Barriers project that we take on in Lincolnshire, I would like to be able to go back to the South Holland Community Group and say that theirs would be the first district that we would look at. And I think I've got a meeting in November with them. So it'd be nice if there's any feedback from this meeting that I could take forward. And that's really the end of me, I think.
Thank you, John. Does anyone have any questions for John?
Chairman, I was just going to say, John, I'm happy to follow up on the funding for the toilets if I can try and get a response as to why we didn't apply, or if there was a reason, or if we did and didn't grant it. So I'll follow up on that if that's okay. Okay.
Sorry, I'll send you the email I sent, and I did previously fill in the form, but the email I can send you that. Thank you.
Yeah.
John, sorry, Chair, Victor Clark.
Go on.
Sorry, we've got Victor and we've got John as well.
John?
I was just going to ask about the funding for the toilets. Is it capital and then running costs, or just capital? Because that would make a big difference.
I think it is just capital from memory, but have a look at the UK Gov site and look under changing places toilets. It's got all the details there. It's actually got the breakdown of the different districts and what funding they were awarded as well. Yeah, it's got a lot of detail there. But as I say, unfortunately, it's all closed now.
Right, I think... Victor?
Yes, sorry. I'm interested in the nature reserves along the coast. My understanding is that in addition to the Rymac Nature Reserve and the one close to Mablethorpe, they're actually establishing a complete area from the boundary of Mablethorpe all the way to Donnanook. Is this something that seems to be the case? Because obviously it affects all sorts of access, because there's not much in the way of facilities along those nature reserves.
There is some more Natural England area that they already own that they are going to come back to us to, and it may be, it's certainly a long-term project, but they're going to come back to us to actually do another survey for that other area that starts opposite the Rymac site, I believe, from memory. In actual fact, if you look, I don't know whether you've got access or had access to the old permissive path. I think it was called Elms Farm or something like that.
Okay.
There's a whole area there that Natural England either own or lease. But I'm sure if you have a word with I can actually get the more details for you, and I can send those out to you if that's what you'd require.
We're certainly interested. It's something that we're starting to talk about in town council as well at the moment. So so I'm interested to see how that goes personally, and from that point of view, because there's a lot of planting of seagrass on the seaside of the sand hills, just to the south of the beginning of that area, and I know that there's going to be a survey of the sand hills and that area in the early part of next year from somebody I spoke to at a Lincolnshire wildlife site festival that was at Doddington Hall 2 weeks ago, and it's just something that I'm taking a personal interest in as well. That's all.
Yeah, Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust does own a fair amount of land on that butts up to that site.
Yes.
So I can have a word with both of them, for both of them to get back to you, if that's what you would like me to do.
Yes, please.
Okay, will do.
The other one we're interested in at the moment, of course, is the old golf course at Sandilands, which is now nationally owned, and there's paths through there, and there are public rights of way along the old railway line from Sutton going south, but I'm still searching to find easy public rights of way to the new old golf course site at Sandilands. And maybe that's sorry.
So in terms of Sandilands, we're actually in touch with the people that are dealing with that. So that's the National Trust, I believe.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So we've been on, I think it was 2 working parties with them to look at how we can actually improve accessibility. And their ideas are pretty good, to be quite honest,
Yes.
in terms of helping the disabled enjoy what's out there.
Yeah.
In actual fact, the other one is a public right-of-way that you talk about along the old railway line, isn't it? And we were looking at that at some stage to be a countryside for all route, but at the moment there was one or two issues that we weren't too sure about. So, and in all honesty, we've got so much work in front of it. Unless you're willing to help us out in that area because you live around there, which would
Well,
be
I
a great.
definitely am. I'm willing to help you out. I most certainly am willing to help you out.
Okay,
Because the old railway line, I believe, is owned by the town council, isn't it, at that stage?
yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
Well, can we have a chat offline and see how we can work together on this one, if that's all right?
That will be, yeah, I'd be very happy to help.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that.
Okay. I think now we've finally reached item 12, haven't we?
Yeah.
Just to give a bit of a history recap, local access forums were formed under the Countryside Rights of Way Act of 2001. It was part of a package of deals all connected with the introduction of the cut-off date, which has now been abandoned for 2026 on definitive map applications. The big one was the right to roam, so-called the open access land creation, and various things going on in connection with that act. And the government decided that all highway authorities should have a local access forum, which was to specifically had to have representatives of people who had an interest in various activities, including cycling, horse riding, off-road driving, and walking, of course, and also land ownership and management. It was specifically required that they were not going to be appointees of organisations. It wasn't as if the Ramblers Association or the British Horse Society and so on were going to, or the Country Landowners Association was going to nominate somebody. People were to be appointed as individuals, but who had those sorts of interests. And it was given that they were given some specific tasks initially, including a role in reviewing the land which had been provisionally identified as potentially open access land under the Act, and also to have an input into the rights of way improvement plans, and also just to be consulted. The idea was that they would be consulted by and advise all the local authorities in their area on matters affecting access to the countryside. Now, at a national level, the latter part, that is, other than their own appointing authorities, I don't think hardly anybody has ever consulted them or even accepted their advice or even made themselves open to receiving advice. The open access land, of course, process went through, and land is now either open access or not. In Lincolnshire, there was hardly any land that was not automatically open access because it was owned by the Forestry Commission, or was always common land. That was created as open access land, so the access forum had really no effect there, if no role. And since then, interest in belonging to the forum has gradually waned, as partly, I think, the landowning interests probably have dropped out fairly early on because they realised that it wasn't a threat to them. I think they really only wanted to be on it to keep an eye on us. And I think everybody else has tended to drop out, and it's been difficult to recruit because they see that the forum has no power and no influence. I'll be blunt about it. And I do begin to wonder what we're here for. Today, it is a requirement that some of the members are appointed by the appointing authorities, so they're their own councillors. We should have a councillor for each authority here. And we have none today. To be fair, I think that's the first time that I can remember that happening. And I feel that the whole thing needs to go back to the beginning. I think the two appointing authorities need to go back to the very beginning of this and say, well, what do we want the forum to do, and what are we prepared to let it to do under the legislation? Because at the moment we seem to be nothing more than a very small talking shop with no power and no influence. And going perfectly blunt about it. And I want us to ask, well, it's only representative for local authority here is Andrew, is what can we do to initiate that process, to go to our appointing authorities and say, you have to hold a review as to how this body is to work, and do you want it to work at all? You are under a statutory obligation, both of them, to have it, but is that just to be a letter, just to be a nominal thing which doesn't really have any function? And I'll ask Andrew to comment on that, but I'll ask everyone else to comment in a moment.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll start on that last point, actually, to give my views on it. Yes, the local access forum is a statutory forum, so we have to have it, but we're asking, from my perspective, we're asking members of the public to give up their valuable time in coming to give us advice. I don't see it as anything other than disingenuous if we did not do our best to make sure that that advice was delivered in their best way. We don't necessarily always have to agree with the advice, but I think it's right that the forum is active, it's regularly supported. We've had the benefit of having a side discussion a few weeks ago, and I would agree that a refresh or a relaunch of the LAF might be beneficial. Looking at what we've got from a certain perspective, we've got a structure where there's 3 councillors, or there's one of them as a vacancy, 8 user interest groups, so it's over 50%, only about 13%, there's only 2 landowners, and then 3 other interests. So it's quite heavily skewed. This is not dissimilar to other local access forums. But from a officer perspective, and when we're looking at advice, I'm looking at ways that we can boost the profile of the LAF's advice and have a greater impact. And one of the ways that it does that is being a consensus forum. So instead of being, say, for example, planning, where everyone will put in their particular perspective from their particular organisation or themselves, it's a balanced opinion, and there's a lot of value in that when we receive that. So I think finding ways to get back to that kind of consensus would be very useful. I think a refresh or a relaunch would be a good thing to do, and quite timely. I'd like to propose that, I mean, I'm only advising the forum, but I think bringing yourself on as chair and interested members on what the forum can do, given that it's been 23 years past the Countryside and Rights of Way Act, what it's going to get involved in. And these 2 items that we've got, the future work of the forum and the work programme, would feed into that. So I've, from notes that we've had previously, we have, particularly in Lincolnshire, quite a lot of nationally strategic important projects being proposed, in form mainly of solar farms, but there's also reservoirs. These are all very high-level strategic projects. They do impact the network. There's the potential negative impacts of the network to be made clear, but there's also a lot of opportunities that come from planning, and I think the forum is well placed to be an interested party in that. It needs, effectively members of the forum to be involved. There's some stuff that officers can do in terms of making the LAF aware of any NSIPs that are going on, but we can't be the one driving it. And just to clarify, NSIPs is nationally strategic important projects.
Can I stop you there?
Sure.
I'd like next, come back to you to see if anybody else wants to contribute anything on this, on the people who are online or in the room.
We've got John Thorns.
John Thorns.
Yeah, I was going to just ask yourself, Chris, and others, what do you see like? What do you see power and influence looking like? So what we've got now is what we've got, but what would, if we had more power and more influence, what would it look like?
Well, I wasn't suggesting that we should have power, because we are an advisory body, and that's fine to have an advisory body. When we don't have funds, we can't allocate, we can't give instructions to anybody. That's what I mean by power. But then I say we are an advisory body only. Influence is, over the years, I haven't really noticed very much influence being taken. Advice is given and it doesn't seem to make very much difference. Now, I'm not suggesting that authorities should do what we tell them all the time, but it would be reasonable to think that if the forum is having a useful function, that there would be rather more things that would happen as a result of us than has done over the years. That's my response to you, John. But is there anyone else wants to say anything first before I go on? Because I'm going to just, Andrew, and I'll come back on this. What you've just said sounds very reasonable, but the thing that's missing here is the appointments to the forum. Now, before the forums were set up, I think most authorities had some kind of a consultation panel. Certainly Lincolnshire had one. It wasn't just rights of way, because at that time it was everything that particular committee, which I think was recreation and rights of way, I think, the committee at the time. But these things change. That's one of the problems with rights of way. It gets moved into different departments and gets tacked on with completely different things. Sometimes it's in with libraries, sometimes it's in with highways. It's all a bit confusing. But there was a consultation panel which had the various countrysides conservation interests and access with it. But the people invited to it or appointed to it were representatives of specific bodies. So you had the Wildlife Trust, for example, and the British Horse Society, the Ramblers Association for Rights of Way. I had some, probably the Country Landowners Association. Yes, they I think were a voice, but all kinds of conservation, nature, and access bodies, but they were all representing particular bodies who could appoint their own representative, and they could come and say, well, we are concerned about this, and they could go back to their members. And I don't feel that I personally, I'm now just me. And the Act is actually written in such a way, that's the way it's supposed to be, which is, I think, makes it rather difficult. North Lincolnshire used to have a consultation panel that I sat on as well. And I understand that I've never been on their local access forum, but they've rather tended to turn it into their consultation panel, and it does tend to work that the members are, in practice, can speak for, informally, the various bodies. But I don't know too much about that. I'm going on second-hand reports. So the problem to the local authority is getting people on this. It's always been a difficulty right from the beginning. It wasn't too difficult recruiting the very first members, but ever since it's got more and more difficult very quickly. And it can't do what you just said unless it has representation of people who can look behind themselves and say, I've got a body of opinion here which is telling me and supporting me in saying this to you, that our members are all concerned. Or that's my feeling. I mean, some of the members may well feel they are in that position. John, you may well feel you're in the position where you can say you're speaking for a wider body because you have a lot of contacts in the disabled access world.
I would say it's I do my best, but it's not as wide as I would like it to be.
Yeah.
And certainly it would need more of my time to actually involve a lot more disability groups to come forward with their thoughts.
Yeah.
And I haven't got that time. But like you, Chris, you can only do what you can only do.
Yeah, but it's to be honest, it seems like a bit of a farce at the moment. A fantasy. The farce is the wrong word. A fantasy that we're a kind of imagining that, like, you're sitting where you are, Andrew, you're consulting this body, but when you think of all the people in Lincolnshire and all the people in Lincolnshire who care about the countryside and want access to it, we're not. Who says that we're representing them? I may well be. I may well have. I'm sure that my personal opinions are shared by a great many people. I'm sure, but I don't really know how many, and I don't know. There must be lots of people out there who want things I've not thought of and need things, and we're not really playing a role. I don't have an answers. I'm just saying that we can't go on like this, where there's two people in a room. Apart from the chairman, and there's two people online as well, and no county councillor.
I tend to agree with you, Chris. It's something that we're trying to do is something that really needs doing, but we need some help from other people, and we need that help in this room or online, and it's not easy for us to get that from where we're sitting as a...
Victor, can you speak?
Yeah. As you probably know, I've only been here 4 years now. In fact, not even then, not quite 4 years. My earlier access with LAFs was in Dorset, right at the very beginning, when they were very concerned about the coastal path and the spreading and the estates alongside there, and that was my original interest. But my work with farms and rural estates over the past 25 years, I've come across lots of cases where agents on the estate didn't know the difference between a permissive path and a right-of-way, and certainly didn't know about the definitive map for each of their counties. And then I come to the situation recently where the town clerk in Mablethorpe didn't even know you existed until I pointed it out to him. And I'm very happy to help in any way that I can on local access for all sorts of people within the parish of Mablethorpe and Sutton and beyond it. We've got two holiday estates now, one on the edge of Maltby and the other one right on the edge of Mablethorpe on the Alford Road. And I would like to see, I regularly see people walking in, particularly from the one on Alford Road, Mablethorpe. And I would like to think that more people could take advantage of access within the countryside, away from the coast, because there's so much to see once you get inland, as well as the coastal path, which is still under consideration. So I will bring what I can to help with all this, and I would hate to see you not being there, so that I can't refer to you anymore, if you see what I mean. So I want to see something that I can help with and I can refer to.
Thank you, Victor. And I'm absolutely sure you're right. There's an enormous potential in the paths in Lincolnshire, both to make them into a much more useful network with some intelligence and a bit of input and to benefit people, both visitors and the people of Lincolnshire, a great deal. And I think it's saying what we all know is that there's an enormous health benefits for a start. There's actually a huge economic benefit to the country in having more access in terms of improved health care, which indirectly ends up saving money to the NHS, and also to the economy, because people like walking in the countryside and just making people happier. But I suppose I'd like to finish this with trying to think of a good way forward, but I feel it really needs some interest on the part of the council itself to want to help us to revive this body. and to make it so that it is actually more useful to everybody, including the council itself. And I don't know how to take that forward, to be perfectly honest.
Thank you, Joe. I would agree. So what I would suggest a way forward for me now is to talk to North East Links as the other appointing
Yes.
authority and get together in a room and come up with the way to relaunch. And one of the ways I would suggest that we need to do that is to come up with, as we were going through before, is what the LAP is going to look at, so that we can answer the what is in it for the members, you know, what's in it for me kind of answer. We're not going to get new members unless they really understand what they're really coming into. So I think that would be the first step. I don't think there's a particular silver bullet.
No.
In terms of influence, so you were saying before, there are things that we can do, but it's after the advice is given. I think we've got to a point where actually there's the LAF is not sure what it's advising on and what topics it's advising on, so I can't treat wording or find ways of pushing the advice if that doesn't come. So I think really I need to take a step back, as you said before, as is figuring out the existential sort of side of the LAF, what's it here for, and then relaunch. But
Well, only when that's decided can we decide what we need in terms of people on it, facilities, and so on, to be able to do that.
I agree. Once you've got what it's going to do, it then gets into how to relaunch, who to contact, how do we get more members. There's advertising we can do, we can talk to different user groups, people who've left, but all of that needs to come back from a start point of what's it going to do. Coming back to what you were saying before about the original, you call them consultation forums, I've known them as rights of way committees and things like that, and they've been successful in that you get a lot of members, representatives of the Ramblers and the British Horse Society and all of the user groups. It's been less successful in terms of landowners, but I believe, and I wasn't in the draftsman at the time, but the reason the Countryside and Raceway Act is worded in the way it is, it didn't want people to have entrenched positions that they were not able to move from, and that was from an overarching aim of having a consensus opinion. But I do, I take your point in that when you had a representative of an organisation, they could send anybody. It wouldn't have to be that particular person.
Yeah.
We are restrained in how the regulations and the guidance tell us that the LAF must operate, but we could look at, as I'm sure North Links has done, what wiggle room that we do have. Now, you can have a personally appointed member who may or may not be, although appointed at an interest level, they also happen to be a member of an organisation. That person can have delegates who can come on their behalf. So that may be some ways that we can look at that. What I think we want to do is try and make that balance so that people are not, they're able to reach consensus and not feel hamstrung by a particular edict from an organisation. So it's going to be a bit of a balance, but I think that's definitely something on the agenda for us to look at.
I understand the point that you made, that if you have one where the bodies themselves appoint their representatives, you can end up with somebody from the Ramblers who just wants to say how awful landowners are all the time and how they're always blocking paths, and somebody from the landowners who wants to say what a damn nuisance the Ramblers are, walking all over his land when he doesn't want them to. And you know, as you say, it doesn't get anywhere. But we've gone to the opposite extreme with this, where we have people who can't speak for anyone, really. I mean, they at least they don't have a body behind them. That's perhaps more important. They might be able to express opinions which they believe are widely held, but it's not quite the same thing as having somebody from, you know, say something like, well, I keep mentioning the Country Landowners Association, which is now called something else, of course, that at least a representative from a body like that can go back and say to their members, you know, well, hang on, you've got to, you know, you've got to be reasonable, so to speak. But I'm not. I think we need a kind of a blue skies thinking really about this, and I don't want to start saying what, throwing up all the obstacles in every direction. We need to try and get a better way forward on it. John again, what to speak?
Mr. Chair, I was going to suggest that I resign, and I await then to be invited to the new start. And I would suggest that other members do that, and then we can rejoin at a later date.
Could you explain a little bit more why we can't just stay as we are until something has been thought out about how to move forward?
I think we'll be waiting for Christmas, if you don't mind me saying. I don't think anything will occur.
Do you think that will, I mean, are you thinking that might sort of make people book their ideas up a bit and think about it? If Andrew goes to the council and says everybody's resigned.
Well, it's going to provoke something.
John, you want, John Law, in the room, you want to speak?
I'm sorry to be a spoilsport, but if all of you resign, can the disability subgroup keep carrying on in the way we are? Otherwise, we're going to fall even further behind than our potential work programme.
I propose that we struggle on as we are, because if all we manage to do is to say to the authorities, keep saying to them, look, can we have a bit of a rethink about this, and or perhaps get a bit more strident about it, then you know that's perhaps something worth doing. But
Sorry, Chair, just for clarity, this group would continue. It just wouldn't have any members in it as it is. So I don't think it would be a case of a refresh as a different. Well, that would be, I think, subject to a formal decision-making process.
Yeah.
So there's just more hoops to jump through.
I mean, I'm not trying to sort of smother this group. I'm trying to kind of give it a bit of an electric shock, really. Only it's not okay. But the thing is, the forum is owned by the county council. It's not owned by us. It's its creature that it is required to set up under the Act, and we don't set the rules. The Parliament set the rules.
Just to come on that, it is, yes, in that sense, we're the appointing authority, but the LAF is also intended to be an independent group. So it's basically got one foot in both of those camps,
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
On the membership, Chairman, we have got, I think I said at the beginning, we are refreshing the terms of reference from the beginning. So we have got the ability to set our own membership, so we could set those posts for any other interest. We could try and recruit to those posts from certain groups if we thought that was going to be beneficial.
Emily, I don't recall this being brought to the forum itself, our terms of reference.
No, I don't think it ever has from the beginning, which is why we're having to write it from scratch, and we've got the opportunity. But we obviously do have members already. So from our perspective in Democratic Services, we can probably expand and change that a little bit now, but we need to keep what we've got and go back to the beginning with that.
Andrew, are you involved in this?
I haven't been to date, but I will be.
You will be.
What we'll
I
do
mean,
is
at some stage, surely we have to be involved ourselves.
Yeah, it will come
Because we might have some useful opinions, to say the least.
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously, you can tell us if we go outside of what's possible because of the legislation, and of course the council at the end of the day, it's its decision. But surely it's the most obvious thing that we should have an input at a fairly early stage.
What I suggest we do is we wrap that up with the whole refresh thing. There is, we don't always have, nor the LAF nor the council has free rein over the terms of reference, because the guidance is particularly detailed. But we'll go through that, and I think an item on agreeing a new terms of reference and discussion with the LAF would be a good idea. But I think let's get myself and my counterpart Matthew in North East Links. I believe he's on the call, so I'm sure he'll put his thumbs up. We'll get together and we'll look at this and get a relaunch sorted out. I think what would be really good, as I said before, is it's not just myself and Matt. It would be we'd have a discussion first and then bring in the LAF to have a discussion before we formally bring it to a meeting for the formal sort of discussion. It would be good to have that sort of thrashing out the detail.
Yes. I always say that consultations should take place at the earliest possible time, because what happens is once people start formulating a draft, they're very reluctant to change it. It's before any decision's been made, before anyone's developed any fixed ideas, that you need to be having the most input.
Just to confirm, Chairman, the terms of reference will absolutely come back to be agreed by the forum, so they won't be agreed by us as officers. They will come to the forum to be agreed.
Yeah, that underlines the point I was making. It's of little use to go to any body, any two words, and say, here's the final document or the final draft. Do you have any comments on it? Because by that stage, it's almost impossible to change anything. Just
in terms of the terms of reference, I think that would be more related to the legislation, rather than what Andrew's referring to as sort of a refresh. And is that where you are?
Yes, I think so. There's certain elements that need to be in the terms of reference, but I think early engagement with you, Chair, would actually be beneficial. One of the things that probably more what you're alluding to, Emily, is more of a vision statement, and whether that is certainly something that is entirely the LAF's preview.
What I understood by terms of reference, it would be something which is pretty much defined in the Act of Parliament. Unless you change the legislation, you're stuck with it. But John wants to speak. John Law.
I very much agree with you, Chris. We need to do it together rather than somebody actually give us some details first to agree to. It's got to be all of us together working in the same direction.
I mean, nobody's disputing that at the end of the day it's the county council's decision, and it can decide what it wants. But the earlier our ideas go in there, if they're good ideas, the better chance they have of being accepted and having an influence. We're perfectly entitled to have bad ideas, and they're perfectly entitled to throw them out. And if we have bad ideas, I would hope they would. All right. I'm sorry to be sort of, I'm aware of them being rather negative, but go on, John.
Well, I've got to say it, or ask it again. Really, whilst we're waiting for the whatever we produce, or whatever together we produce, can the disability subgroup continue on its merry way?
Well, I would say yes. If that's everyone else's view, can I have a vote on that? All those who wish the disability subgroup to continue, say yes.
Yes.
I think that's a yes.
Chris, is that okay with you? Is that okay? All right, my apologies.
I'm also not a member of Forum, so I'm unable to vote.
Okay, so I'm going ahead with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. We're on the last item now. We're on the last item, aren't we? The Forward Work Programme, which simply is anybody who got anything they want for the future agendas, basically. John?
I don't think we can do that until we've got whatever we get.
We've just been dealing with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, in effect. We're all in one great big jumble. In that case...
Chair, if I could just come in there. just as a suggestion, whilst we work out the relaunch of the LAF and the future LAF, there are things that are pressing on from a strategic point of view. I would like to make a suggestion that some of the more urgent national, the NSIP solar farms and things like that, I could provide a list and the details to the LAF that allow you to consider whether or not you want to register as an interested party or provide responses for the planning inspectorate.
You've just reminded me of something that I did mean to mention that I'd actually had forgotten, and that is there any reason why we can't use, well, I think we all have a, because we've received emails, all receive the same emails, we do in effect have a list of our own members. Now, are there any, what's the word I'm looking for? The data protection objections to us sharing information, or if not, setting up a group where we can simply email a group for the forum. And you can as well, because I think between meetings, if we had things could be put to us to consider, not to formally resolve on, not to have a meeting, but so that we could discuss things, or you could ask questions, and we could perhaps come to meetings. Members might be more keen to come to meetings if we'd had a little bit of discussion over topics beforehand and had time to formulate ideas and gather information and so on as they crop up. Is that feasible?
I'll look into if there's any issues with sharing between, but as long as everybody else is okay with that, I think we probably have to check. But I'll have a look into it, and if everybody's okay, then we'll look at setting something up.
I mean, okay? As it is, we could just use these emails we have and say reply all, but I don't like doing that. It's a very risky thing to do. We accidentally send things to people who you don't realise on the list and so on. And it's also important that I think we're open with each other. We don't start getting... Well, there's nothing to stop us having private conversations. That's a thing that has to happen anyway, behind...
If I can come in, the West Berks and, well, the Mid and West Berks Local Access Forum, as it were, did have a particular protocol written into their terms of reference about how to handle consultations that happen in between meetings.
Yeah.
It allowed that very much a discussion. They'd prior to the setting up of whatever working group the forum had formally agreed effectively as standing orders of what their advice or the type of approach they would take, and then responses to planning applications and large ones were able to be done outside of a formal meeting and then effectively ratified at the next meeting. So we could explore how that might work for Lincolnshire as well.
Well, I mean, the obvious thing to do it with is what we've been discussing today, is to circulate the members and say, look, we see these problems with the way the LAF's going forward, and we're thinking of having we're going to take it forward in this way so far. Just so that everybody knows, really. So, can I leave it with you then? Yeah.
Certainly.
We already have the date for the next one, don't we? We haven't got an item on here for choosing a date, but...
No, we do. Bear with me a second, I'll just tell you. We do have them agreed, yeah, they are in the diary.
That's what I thought, yeah. Before we close the meeting, do the people online, anybody have anything to add at the moment? No. I think I'm due to close the meeting then. Right.
Sorry, John was just going to come in.
John Thorne?
Mr. Chairman, I've decided to resign, so it's my last meeting. I'd like to thank everybody very much. If you do have a renew and a refresh, I'd be quite happy to come back. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your contributions. With that, then, I'll declare the meeting closed.